Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it. The beauty salon was in a convenient location on one of the main streets of the capital. The firm was already 8 years old. Clientele, tried employees, experienced and dedicated. Not a lot of customers today, Jeannie told her colleague, the experienced handyman who had worked here since day one. I've already had 2 appointments cancelled, Diana sighed grudgingly. Second colleague. Jeannie and Diane were professionals at their jobs, and Kevin had no questions about them. But they had a way of making a mess of things. 3 months ago, Kevin had hired a young master craftsman, Betty, at the Apesy beauty shop. She was 27. She had experience in the provincial barbershop. Jeannie and Diane were perplexed as to why she was hired to work in their establishment. Although from the looks of it, it is clear that it is easy. I really appreciate you both as professionals. The owner responded to their complaints. But Betty is aware of some outdated techniques that many clients in their old age enjoy. And in our salon, such capricious ladies are willing to pay decent money to have their wishes satisfied. And the smile of those ladies at Betty's is sincere, not like yours. But her colleagues did not listen to their bosses and would not tolerate some ridiculous upstart from the wilderness. They mocked her in every way, discussing aloud, unashamedly, laughing at the contingent of clients with whom they had worked. Jeannie immediately taught Diana how to choose her clientele, never to take those who looked finicky and poor. Betty was quiet by nature. She endured all the taunts of her colleagues. She didn't pretend to be hurt by them, but she still felt resentment. She did not want to conflict or spoil relations even more. And they took her to a decent place. This was her chance, and she couldn't fly out of a job. If she tried and could be patient, she would soon get her clients together and be able to make as much money as Diana and Jenny. Then Betty hoped to upgrade her closet to the fancy ones of her colleagues and groom herself the old-fashioned way. Betty stood at her desk, tidying up, when a girl showed up at the salon. Maidie was dressed in simple clothes. Her red hair was gathered into 2 neat braids. Jenny immediately turned away, realizing that fiddling with a girl of about 9 was not in her best interest. She always waited for bigger fish to show up and didn't waste time on simpletons. Betty, take it, Jenny told her. Betty readily turned to the child. She looked confused, too. Her eyes were wet. Instantly, a sympathetic ear and a desire to help were awakened in her. Hello. She put her hand out to the little girl. What's wrong? Are you lost? No, said Maddie. I need a haircut. A lot. It's a matter of life and death. Betty was surprised at the seriousness of the statement. She wasn't used to children talking about such things. But who knew to children talking about such things? But who knew? Is it that serious? Sat down in front of her and smiled. What's got you so upset? I need one haircut, and I don't have any money. Maidie almost cried again. I've already been kicked out of 2 hair salons, and I have to go back to my mom's. I can't go away for long. Betty didn't hesitate long. She decided she would help the girl and pay for the service out of her own pocket. Nothing terrible would happen. If she did it to comfort the bitter little girl. It's all right. I won't throw you out. You hear me? Get in the chair and show me. What kind of hair do you want? She answered, afraid that the hairdresser might change her mind. Immediately, I took a picture out of my pocket and handed it to her. This one. Betty was dumbfounded to see in the picture a weak-looking woman with a completely shaved head. Honey, are you sure? Yes. Betty realized that Maddie's mom had cancer. Maddie wanted to support her mother and lose her gambling misfits. Maybe you shouldn't after all. You have such lovely hair. I don't think your mom would be happy. If you sacrifice it, Betty tried to talk her out of it, but the girl wouldn't let it go. That's the way I want it. I'll do it anyway. Maddie with her arms crossed over her chest. Your mother already knows you love her. I'm sure she does. And she might get even more upset if she sees you bald. Betty tried again, but she underestimated the child. You're a very smart girl, and you take care of Mama. She appreciates that. But what you want to do won't solve the problem. You better go back to your mom. Give her a big hug. No, you don't understand. Nobody understands me. This is important, and I need it. Suddenly, the little girl screamed and started to cry. That was exactly what Betty was afraid of. The customers began to look at them. Some cringed at the sound of a baby crying. Some looked away indifferently, and some watched with interest. What's the matter? Why is there noise in the hall? Kevin said in a calm tone. So fortunate to leave his office, he caught a curious scene in the middle of the workday and demanded an explanation. Kevin was young for an owner of such a business. He was only 33 and already had several salons around town. He wasn't embarrassed about making money in the beauty industry, though many real men might have referred to him disparagingly. Dear guests, I apologize for the noise. He addressed the customers and turned to Betty. But no sooner had she opened her mouth than Diana fired. She was quicker when it came to scheming. Kevin, she drove someone else's kid to hysterics. The girl came in for a haircut. She refuses to serve her, tries to kick her out. And we warned you. Ginny showed up, and there she was. And she raised an eyebrow meaningfully. She's ruining our image. I don't want to hear any more about her mother. Diane cut in again. Kevin finally got Betty's attention. The girl wants to lose her hair to support her mother. As soon as the host took the photo from the employee's hands, he could hardly resist. You're all right. At once the masters gasped, grabbing him by the arms. Kevin knew Maddie's mother. A few years ago, Elizabeth had worked as a maid in his family home, but her father had become enraged when he learned of the connection between her and his eldest son. John was crazy about Elizabeth. They seemed so happy. Kevin knew about his brother's affair and kept it a secret. And their father wanted to strengthen the family's position, so he prophesied John would marry the daughter of an important man. And he set him up like that. How could you put up with that? Kevin yelled at John when he found out that he had cut Elizabeth out of his life. Are you afraid of being disinherited? That's slavery. Dad's been telling us what to do our whole lives. Let's see what you would do if you were me, John snapped. Kevin called out to him again. Kevin could hardly take his eyes off Elizabeth's picture. He had wondered how her fate had turned out before, but he had no idea that such a fate had befallen her. It was obvious from Elizabeth how sick she was. Kevin was struck by the thought that fate was unfair. A car accident took John's life 7 months after he and Elizabeth parted ways. She probably doesn't even know he's gone. Is that her daughter? He asked Betty, not paying attention to anyone else. Hello? Don't be afraid, don't cry. I won't hurt you, he told Madai. Will you tell me what's wrong? So you love your mother so much that you want to do this for her? Kevin asked Maddie a question. I know your mom. I'm not cheating. Her name is Elizabeth. And how do you know that? Asked the girl, looking straight into his eyes. Are you my daddy? No, but I might have known your daddy. My mom didn't have anyone else. She only ever loved my daddy and raised me by herself. A girl as old as she was. Instead of shaving your head for her, why don't you bring an old friend to see her? I'm sure she'll be very grateful to you. I'd be glad to meet her, too. Maddie squinted her eyes as she considered the offer and agreed. Could she come with us? She pointed at Betty, and she was confused. I liked her. Are you free? Asked Kevin, the employee. Well, I can go with you. She smiled at the madam. On the way to the hospital, Betty and Kevin didn't talk. She saw the resemblance between him and Maddie. She heard her ask about her father. But she didn't ask questions. Should she be interested in other people's business? Betty was glad Kevin had hired her without too much trouble. After all, the other salons had turned her down. She didn't want to lose her job over curiosity. Kevin, on the other hand, tried to entertain the little girl along the way, but kept falling into his own thoughts. Maddie might have been John's daughter, his niece. Elizabeth never once made herself known, never asked for help. How difficult it had been for her. And Kevin's family had no idea. If the parents had known they were going to have a granddaughter, they wouldn't have been angry. "Here we are," Maddie said. And she jumped out of the car first. The hospital corridors were familiar. She had no trouble navigating and leading the visitors. As soon as the nurse saw them, she changed her face. "Are you here to see Elizabeth?" She looked worried and looked away, waiting for the doctor. "Yes, I am an old friend of hers. I only just found out about her illness. I couldn't come sooner." "I'm sorry," the nurse said and fell silent. "I will take you to her doctor." Maddie did not understand anything, but the adults guessed the tone of the nurse. When the doctor was in front of them, he said sympathetically, "Elizabeth's organs were working hard and hard. It was only a matter of time before they would soon fail. We could not save her. The treatment was no longer working. Elizabeth herself asked for it to happen. Rather, she asked to call her daughter, but Maddie was nowhere to be found." The girl stood back, not quite sure what was going on. Then the doctor spoke to her as well. During the time Elizabeth had spent in the hospital, he had become accustomed to telling the girl everything. She always waited for his opinion and understood that he would not lie. "Mommy, my mommy," repeated the little girl, crying on Betty's lap. Maddie couldn't believe that her mommy wasn't the moment she happened. They couldn't say goodbye. Couldn't talk to each other one last time. Maddie was angry at herself for leaving the hospital. She was so hurt, so hurt. She had no idea what would happen to her next. Poor girl. Tears were rolling down her cheeks and her heart was bursting with pain for the child. She didn't know how to help her, how to ease her suffering. She had never comforted people after such a loss. Maddie was left an orphan. Kevin understood that he was now the only person close to her. If his wife turned out to be John's daughter, not all of her family was lost. Kevin was at a complete loss. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't prepared for this turn of events, and he had never considered that life might put him before a choice like this, to take Maddie in or to turn her over to the child welfare authorities. "What to do now?" Betty asked. "She has no one at all. They'll put her in an orphanage now," looking into her frightened eyes. "He couldn't let that happen. And if I take Maddie in, is that legal?" Again Betty pondered. "No, though. My apartment's rented, and my roommate's mean. Maybe you could take Maddie in. You're no stranger to her." "We'll do that," Kevin sighed, looking at the child on the hospital bench in the hallway. He was sad that the girl was orphaned. She had never known her father, never knew what her life might have been like without the need and illnesses of hardship. If her father and mother had allowed John to marry people, they might have cured her. And her son's fate would have been different. There was no time to worry about the past now. Kevin understood Maddie needed a guardian here and now. Because of his last name and the credibility he evoked, he negotiated with a child welfare representative to become Maddie's temporary guardian. "I knew her mother, and I am in a position to provide a decent life for the child," he said firmly. "But you work 10 o'clock a day. Who's going to look after Maddie?" Dell objected. "Look, her psyche is not stable right now. You can't leave her with babysitters. She needs someone she can trust." "I understand. I promise you that while Maddie is living in my house, I will turn over most of the work to the deputy. My fiancée is good with children at home. It's easier for her as a woman. And Betty, my coworker, promised to visit the girl. They're kind of friends, and Maddie likes her." Kevin himself didn't quite know if he was doing the right thing. Georgia certainly wouldn't be thrilled to have a baby in the house. She was only 24, a decent difference between the two lovers. She was attracted to Kevin's status, his earnings, his grooming and problem-solving skills. However, she wasn't mature enough for married life. No children until she was 30. Georgia made a condition to Kevin. We need to live for ourselves, and we can always have children. You got me young and healthy. At first, Kevin accepted this and did not complain. But after 3 years of the relationship, Georgia hadn't changed. She always wanted to have fun, to improve her appearance at his expense. After all, her fiancé had a business in the beauty industry. It was a sin not to take advantage, and more often Kevin caught himself thinking that he was unhappy with his beautiful bride. She was losing her attractive character traits, engaged only in external transformation. Georgia thought that was enough. Kevin, on the other hand, having lost his entire family, longed to be with his loved ones again, to care for them together, to sit at the dinner table, to celebrate the holidays with those closest to him. Georgia, on the other hand, was forever luring him to flashy parties where all anyone talked about was clothes and silly internet hype. Kevin took his guardian duties with great responsibility. He personally drove and picked up Maddie from school. He tried to be the kind of adult she wouldn't mind asking for help or pouring his heart out to. Kevin did Maddie's homework with her, helped her deal with difficult questions. They ate together. Gradually, there were more and more children's things, toys, girly little things in his house. They were so pretty. When Betty paid her a visit with another gift of kitty socks, "Thank you. Wear them in good health," Betty hugged her back. "Are we going to play tonight?" Georgia watched their warm conversation from a corner, trying not to give away her presence, though there was no hiding her heavy stare. It was clear to everyone in the house that she was against Maddie and Betty's visits to her. "Stop peeking, it's indecent." Kevin approached the bride from behind. "Can't you take the girl home? They'll be better off." There, in a whimsical voice, Georgia began a familiar song. "That question is already closed. I'm tired of saying the same thing over and over again. Maddie's practically family to me. I'm not putting her on a stranger." Kevin didn't know what he was more angry about. On the one hand, he didn't like the fact that Georgia was completely uninvolved in Maddie's life and was just waiting for the right moment to get rid of her. On the other hand, he began to notice his desire to be near Beatty. He liked that she was simple and open. She accepted Maddie as her own little sister, surrounded her with care, gave her the support she was missing. Kevin himself began to offer to take Betty to their house after work to meet Maddie. "She talks about you all the time." Kevin laughed. "You're like a mom to her, a sister to her, and a girlfriend to her. Yes, we have our secrets." With a smile, Betty replied, "I don't know how her life is going to turn out, but she trusts you too. We could switch to you for convenience," he suggested. Before, Betty hadn't paid any attention to Kevin as a man. She understood that he was good-looking, but the difference in social status prevented her from even considering the idea of getting closer. Now the relationship between them had changed. She observed not the businesslike, determined boss, but the caring Kevin, who tried to indulge the little girl if she resented him. He was learning to play board games. Wandered around the house while playing catch-up. The more Betty saw him like that, the more sympathy for him grew in her heart. Georgia was far from stupid and was well aware that her groom had found common ground with Betty. She didn't like what it would lead to. She couldn't lose such a lucrative husband. She hadn't moved to the capital to have some wiretap a flirt with Kevin and flap her innocent eyes. He was treating that girl like she was his own daughter. Georgia complained over the phone to Frank. She didn't think fidelity was the key to a happy marriage, so she had a lover. Kevin didn't need to know that. After all, he didn't share her fiancé's views. "We have to figure out a way to kick these. Outlasted them out of the house, not me messing it up. You ought to see the way Betty's making eyes at him. She's an angel in the flesh." "We ought to think it over," Frank advised her. "And if you rush it, you might give yourself away. You've got to get this right so there's no further questions. Kevin, he's your goofball. He can't see past his own nose. He wouldn't even suspect you of cheating if someone told him." Georgia talked to Frank for a long time, discussing every detail of their plan. She was relieved that someone shared her feelings and could help. A few days later, a man with glasses and a sharp suit showed up on the doorstep of the beauty academy. He was looking for Kevin. Look how she tries to oblige. Diane sees her off with a disdainful glance. Kevin tells her to. She hops on one leg. Pathetic. Ginny nodded. What chance does she have, though? She's a hick. She understands how things are done in the capital. At least in some way she's wised up and decided to find her place in the sun. She hasn't even met Georgia yet. She'll put her in her place in no time. How can I help you? Kevin answered the knock when he saw a stranger in front of him. Hello, my name is Liam. I am a notary and represent the interests of Elizabeth. Please have a seat. Kevin immediately rushed over. I'm here to see you. I've come to notify you of her last will and to give you an envelope. If you have any questions, call me. Here's my card, along with himself. Kevin opened the letter, which contained a message from Elizabeth in familiar handwriting. She was aware that she was gone. John's daughter apologized for hiding her from her family for so many years and not giving her grandparents a chance to meet her. She regretted not expressing her condolences after John's death. She was heartbroken by the event, but could not find the strength to personally visit the house from which he had been ruthlessly kicked out in disgrace. In the evening, as the salon masters were going home, Kevin asked Betty to stick around. Ginny and Diana looked at each other meaningfully, but did not get in the way. Maddie's expecting me? Betty asked. They didn't have an appointment today? I have good news, Kevin said, beaming at her. Maddie is my own niece. She really is John's daughter. The notary came by today and told me. That's great. So you can have legal custody of her, and she's no longer an orphan. She has a family. Almost jumped in place of Betty. She was very happy for Maddie to no longer be so lonely in this world, even though she was being cared for by a rich uncle who didn't deny her anything and didn't skimp on attention. But the girl feared that sooner or later it would be over. But Georgia, upon hearing the news of Kevin's kinship with Maddie, was not thrilled. How can you believe one left-handed letter? I mean, she was dying. She could have lied to get her daughter settled. Georgia admonished. I believe her, Kevin cut her off. I'm not even going to do a DNA test. It's pretty obvious. You've seen John's picture. It's the same face. They even mistake her for my daughter. There's a family resemblance. You can't decide these things without me. Kevin, I'm your family. I'm your future wife, and I'll have your children. She raised her tone. I can't become the mother of a 9-year-old girl who is a complete stranger to me overnight. You haven't even tried to be friends. Maddie is an adult. She doesn't need to be wiped or spoon-fed. Like it or not, I'm not giving up my family. Maddie's the only family I've got in this world. The memory of my dead brother. And I'm not putting her in an orphanage just because you want her. Georgia knew she'd never get what she wanted with her scandals. She'd already said too many things she didn't want to. Now she was sure she was ready to put her and Frank's plan into action. At Kevin's request, Georgia was spending more and more time alone with Maddie, but not to make contact with her. Do you love Uncle Kevin? She asked Maddie. Do you think he cares about you because you're related? Yes. That's what he explained to me. I'm glad I have him. Why? At a loss, the girl asked. Because Uncle Kevin knew Mom. They had been friends for a long time. Maybe he was ashamed of you. Georgia continued to mess with the child's head. Maybe he's ashamed of what he did to your mom. At that moment, Kevin, who had returned from work, entered the room. Georgia immediately took off from the girl and pretended to collect the doll's clothes. Georgia's scrutinizing gaze and her sneaky voice touched something inside Maddie. She felt uneasy. She didn't know what Georgia meant, but she couldn't just leave it at that. She'd watched her outside her bedroom late at night. Uncle Kevin had done something bad. Georgia put a frightened finger to her lips and pulled Maddie aside. Don't turn me in. I'm your ally. Uncle Kevin is responsible for your mother's death. Everything happened because of him. It's his secret. Just don't tell anyone, okay? That night, Mady couldn't sleep a wink. She lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the big, rich house. She didn't know who to believe. Georgia had never talked to her much. It must have been hard for her to keep Kevin's secrets. She was afraid to approach Mady lest she arouse suspicion from her youthful naivete. Mady didn't realize she could be led astray. Her mother had always been completely honest with her, raising her on her own. Georgia's words seemed true to Mady. Oh, if only Mommy had been with her. If only she had helped her figure it out. Maddie couldn't believe that her uncle, so kind, funny, caring, considerate, could do that to her. He was just lying. To her, it turned out, he lied and kept her close to him. He did not love her. He just took her out of pity. He killed her mother and separated them. The woman cried, reaching herself with contradictory thoughts. Tension was growing inside her. She was afraid she could no longer stay in this house. She had to run away. Tomorrow was Sunday. She had no school. At breakfast, Maddie didn't cross paths with Kevin, and that made her feel better. Where are my girls? Kevin clapped his hands together as he always did to gather his family around him. What should we do after dinner? Georgia already figured it out. Maddie, where are you all? Georgia came down from the second floor a few minutes later. What are you making so much noise for? Maddie, where were you and Betty? They went for a walk together. They went out another 4 o'clock. Georgia lied. It's late. Where can they be for so long? Kevin wondered and pulled out his smartphone. And why didn't she tell me anything? You girls are weird. Wait, maybe she fell asleep at home all of a sudden. She went to Maddie's bedroom, knowing she wouldn't be there. She'd realized the girl had run away from home earlier in the day. She grabbed some food, a few things, and with her backpack full, she dashed away. She didn't trust anyone else and couldn't stay in Kevin's house. Georgia was playing as well as she could, and Betty was deliberately set up. With one rival eliminated of her own accord, it was worth getting rid of the other. With a wild look, Kevin asked his fiancée, where was she? Maybe grabbing her head. Betty said she didn't come to see us today. She's our way here. How could you see her? Kevin, do you think I'm crazy or something? I saw them going for a walk with my own eyes. That's what Betty told me. They were coming for dinner, so I was calm. If Maddie hadn't been in my sight all day, I'd have thought it strange, and I'd have found out sooner. She came at the first call. Betty didn't immediately realize what was going on. Kevin and Georgia were already on edge. The man went straight to her, took her by the shoulders, and stared intently into her eyes. Betty, tell me honestly, did you see Maddie today? Did you take her anywhere? Kevin, Just say yes or no. Have you seen her? No. Let go of me. Betty pushed him away from her. You were here today, weren't you? Georgia spoke up. Not a muscle in her face flinched as she lied. The speech was plausible and confident. I've seen you together. Where do you think she is with me now? You're the eternal girlfriends, all whispering together. Secrets. What are you making up? Betty was indignant. But Kevin interrupted her again. Where is it? Did you hide it? Why did you hide it? You know how much I care about it, don't you? Do you want money? Or what? He want money or what? He was perplexed. He had no proof of anything. But Maddie was missing. Kevin was in a panic. I had nothing to do with Maddie going missing. Did you call the police? She needs to be reported missing. Stay here. Let the police question you too, Kevin told her. Georgia could barely hide a satisfied smile. Everything was going according to her plan. At Kevin's insistence, the police questioned Betty for more than an hour, but she had nothing to say. She was devastated by Maddie's disappearance and shattered by the betrayal on Kevin's part. Why had he let all the dogs down on her? What had she got out of stealing Maddie? Was she the only one who thought there was something special brewing between them? Betty returned home late in the evening. She'd been pressured, intimidated, tried to slyly draw out some truth, but in the end, they let her go. Kevin never called her or returned her phone calls. The search, however, continued. Despite her fatigue, Betty thought of walking the streets herself to look for the girl. Even though Elizabeth had raised her on her own, she was a child and could get into a dangerous situation. From early in the morning, Betty called Kevin. He resisted for a long time, then answered. What was the news? Ignoring her own anxiety, she asked. I don't want you in my house anymore, she asked. And don't come into my parlor either. I don't trust you. I don't know what you've done to me, but you'd better get out of my sight. Kevin whispered through his teeth. You don't understand anything, Betty exclaimed. I'm not lying to you. I love her too, and I would never do anything to hurt her. Why don't you believe me? This conversation is useless. There was no more ringing. There was no point in calling again. Betty knew Kevin wouldn't forgive her. He'd gotten it into his head that she was to blame, made an enemy. For the first couple of weeks, Betty didn't think about herself. She wandered the streets looking for Maddie, asking passers-by about her, showing her picture. She pestered beggars on the street. She knew they must have seen something, but there were no results. The breakup of her entire relationship with Kevin had taken a much harder toll on Betty than she had imagined. She had to look for a new job. After all, she had to pay her rent. Her roommate was nothing but a help. She would never lend her money. She had to make her own living. Betty kept waiting for the phone to ring and for Kevin to ring and for Kevin to tell her that Maddie had been found and she was okay. Then he would admit his mistake, apologize. She would forgive him because she understood her niece's concern. But days went by, and the longed-for call never came. At some point, Betty gave up hope. She was living her own life, leaving her happy moments with Kevin somewhere behind. Getting rid of her rival didn't exactly give Georgia what she expected. She waited undividedly for the attention of the bridegroom. As she had before, she got, alas, the motor-driven and moody Kevin. He lost two people dear to his heart at once, for he could not accept Betty's betrayal. Was she not who she said she was? Had he not seen her as a threat? Why wouldn't she admit to seeing Maddie? Kevin was plagued with questions and didn't know who to demand answers from. He wasn't worried about Betty, but Maddie still hadn't been found, and he didn't know how to live his life. Having lost her, he worried that something bad would happen to her. She was just a child and not ready to live on her own. Georgia tolerated Kevin's aloofness for the first month, and then she got bored. She swirled around him, tried to distract him. She wanted to show him how beautiful life was when the two of us— You don't understand, Kevin yelled at her. The baby is gone. It wasn't a wrapper, it wasn't a toy. A real live person, just a little one. Are you hurt? I know you care for her, but you don't know how Maddie lived all those years with her mom. She may not have been as right as you think, don't get me wrong, but her mother was very ill. The girl was often left unsupervised. Suddenly your lush house only scared her. She's used to other things. Maddie might not have liked it here, so she ran away. But no one was hurting her. But she chose her own way. You can't beat yourself up about it forever. Georgia sat down next to Kevin, kissing him on the cheek and resting her head on his shoulder. To finally get the groom out of his unpleasant state, she somehow decided to cheer him up with some surprising news. Honey, I'm pregnant, she whispered in the early morning, coming out of the bathroom. Okay, through sleep, Kevin replied. I'm expecting a baby. We're going to be parents. Can you hear me? Kevin opened his eyes. He thought he was dreaming about Georgia's words. But no, she was standing in front of him with a snowy smile and even a little fear. What did you say? You're expecting a baby. He sat up in bed. Yes, we're going to have a baby of our own. Oh my God. Wow. How's that? Come here, will you? Kevin pulled his bride to him and kissed her. You're my good girl. This is the best gift ever. Ever since Kevin found out he was going to be a father, he hadn't left Georgia's side. I know you value your independence. But if you're ever in trouble, call me right away, he warned his fiancée. Every morning before you leave for the salon. I will, don't worry about it. However, as soon as Kevin left home, Georgia ran to call Frank. Get over here quick. I'm sick of him taking care of me. We have to do everything. My belly should be growing by now, and I'm not pregnant yet, she yelled at Frank on the phone. I'm always ready for something like this. Wait, I'll be right there. Ever since the news of the pregnancy became known, Kevin had ordered a wedding. The celebration was going to be lavish and unforgettable. The thought of a baby coming into their family in just a few months, it gave Kevin hope. He was happy, simply elated. Maddie's care had awakened many new feelings in him, and he knew what he would experience when he held his own baby for the first time. He would be a baby after all, and he would need everything. He would have no concept of the world, while Kevin dreamed of having an heir to his firstborn. There was no way Georgia could conceive a child from her lover. Again, she was angry for nothing after another pregnancy test. You're not trying hard enough. If you can't, I'll find someone else who's more proactive. I'm doing fine. You snapped right away, Frank. I'm doing the best I can. Yours can wait. Soon Georgia had no reason to be nervous either. She saw 2 real lines on the test. No longer was she afraid of revealing deception. She knew she'd bonded with Kevin forever. She wouldn't need anything. She wouldn't be abandoned. And with Frank, Georgia kept in touch for the soul. He was something close to her. After the wedding, Georgia felt the full weight of pregnancy. She no longer rejected her husband's help, but demanded it. Oh, look out. Oh, Georgia, clutching her belly. Does it hurt? No, she exhaled. It's pushing for the first time. Look, she grabbed Kevin's palm and put it to the right area of her stomach. Can you feel it? I can feel it, Kevin said, barely audible. The couple looked at each other with genuine happiness. Kevin had not been this happy in a long time, and Georgia was jubilant. She had achieved everything, had gotten everything she expected from life. Maddie's name came up less and less often in conversation. As soon as Kevin brought her up, she'd find an excuse to pay attention to her belly, which was growing by the day. Kevin loved spending time in the baby's room, which had been furnished to his parents' specifications in just a month. Are you here again? Georgia smiled at her spouse. Why so sad? Our little girl is about to break free, thinking about where Maddie is now. She doesn't even know she's going to have a baby sister. Can you imagine? They could be so close. Maddie would be interesting with one. Kevin told me of his dreams. Well, if she ever shows up, we won't chase her away, Georgia said, barely able to contain her irritation. There's nothing more you can do for her. She has chosen her own way. Let her go. Suddenly, Georgia felt something stir at her feet. She looked under her and found a puddle. Kevin, here we go. It started Kevin. For the next few hours, he was in the hallway of the best clinic in town, where Georgia was in labor. Kevin had made sure in advance that the best doctor was in charge of his wife and baby. He was grateful that fate had sent him a baby girl and that they would soon be reunited. Kevin almost fell asleep, leaning his head against the wall, when the midwife approached him. Congratulations on your daughter, she said with a smile. You can visit your darlings. Put this on. Kevin walked on cotton legs. He knew that as soon as he took her in his arms, life would change forever. Kevin and George's 18 years of growing up had not been easy for Victoria. They fought a lot with each other, not sharing an opinion on parenting. They learned to hear each other, scared and happy. Victoria was more like Georgia, both in looks and personality. But she loved her sensible father and tried to curb her emotions. I just have strong genes, Georgia joked. Every time someone noticed how much Victoria resembled her mother, and there was nothing about her from her father. Victoria was doing great in school. Kevin helped her with her studies, always encouraged her enthusiasm for sports and creativity. Georgia, on the other hand, brought her daughter taste, dressed her up like a doll. watched her appearance habits, her grades on all fronts. Victoria grew up to be a girl her parent could be proud of. "You look great in that dress," Kevin sighed, seeing his daughter early in the morning in the gorgeous dark blue dress she was going to show up in during the prom in just 12 hours. "Thanks, Dad. The makeup artists will be here soon and then they'll do her hair. I feel like a princess." Victoria laughed. Kevin couldn't help but admire her, remembering that she had laughed just as subtly when she was 10 years old and sad. And now a high school graduate stood before him, almost an adult. "Victoria, did you get into it again?" Georgia appeared in the room. "Take it off right away. You're bound to put a stain on it now. Even a drop of water will be enough to ruin it." "Okay, Mommy, don't swear." Victoria just agreed. Kevin's business hasn't been idle in 18 years. He opened a few more salons in the capital, but he didn't hand over the management to Georgia. She had always wanted to run her own business, and everything was already set up here. She knew beauty, and this was the most suitable occupation for her. And Kevin used the proceeds from his many years of work to acquire knowledge, invest money, lucrative projects, actively donated to cancer relief foundations, and sponsored an animal shelter, and everywhere Kevin had to manage. He was a man of success that every respectable businessman in town wanted to work with. Trying not to be late for the gala portion of Victoria's graduation party, Kevin hurried the driver to avoid traffic. Soon the car pulled up in front of a fancy restaurant that Kevin had been to more than once, despite the vastness of the hall. There were too many people. Kevin had to look around to get his bearings and figure out where his daughter's class was. But suddenly his eyes snatched out of the crowd a face very familiar, but long forgotten. A blonde girl dressed in an elegant red dress with a slit on the leg posture. Only it wasn't her beauty that attracted him. It was Maddie, that's for sure. She was only now an adult and beautiful woman, combining the best of both her parents. Kevin couldn't help but notice. He even caught his breath. He wasn't ready to miss Maddie again. He pulled himself together and stepped closer, distracting her from the group of people with dainty glasses in their hand. "Excuse me." Kevin drew his niece's attention to himself. "Your name is Maddie?" "Yes." "And what agency are you from?" she asked. And then she froze. She recognized him for sure. Her eyes widened in surprise. But Maddie quickly pulled herself together in surprise. "So you remember me, Uncle Kevin?" "I remember you." She smiled softly. "You've become such a beauty. Are you here for work?" he asked. Kevin wanted to ask Maddie a lot of questions, to find out everything, but he couldn't quite put his mind together. He'd seen her again, and she was fine. Not only that, she looked fine, clearly not suffering from poverty or lack of acceptance. "It's Mom's birthday," said Maddie with glowing eyes. Moms didn't understand. Kevin turned around. Betty was approaching him. Age suited her. She'd changed. A different haircut, hair color. Her clothes were more expensive and her gaze had grown wiser. "Hello, Kevin," she said. There was no resentment, no anger, no jab in her tone. He met two dear people at a moment he hadn't expected at all. The man was confused and did not know what to do. "I can see that you are very surprised." She smiled at him. "Happy birthday, Betty," said Kevin. "Sorry, I didn't expect to see you." "Thank you." "What are you here for?" "My daughter's graduation. I have to go, but can I find you later?" Kevin asked hopefully and got a positive answer. He danced a slow dance with Victoria. The girl was glad to say goodbye to the school, but not to the people she had shared her years of school with. She couldn't believe it was ending, even though every high school student waits for this moment. Parting always comes unexpectedly. "Dad, you look so thoughtful." "Did something happen at work?" Victoria took her father's hand. "You haven't eaten anything at all. And this is your favorite food." "That's not it. Remember I told you about Maddie, your missing cousin? She's at this restaurant tonight. After almost 20 years. How did you recognize her? Victoria was surprised. She looks just like your Uncle John. If Maddie wants to talk to me, I'll introduce you. You're sisters, after all. It took a great effort for Victoria to overcome her curiosity and not follow her father when he decided to rejoin Betty and Mady. He called for a waiter and asked that a basket of gorgeous flowers and a bottle of the best champagne be brought to their table. Thank you. Betty thanked him, inviting him to sit down. I'm sorry I didn't bring you a present. Maddie, I don't mean to be rude, but please answer the question. Why did you run away? What happened? It's been bugging me all these years. I couldn't understand or accept it. Mady and Betty looked at each other. There was no animosity in them. It had been so many years, but Kevin felt uncomfortable. I was intimidated by your fiancée, Georgia, a snake. When we were alone, she was always telling me that you were responsible for my mother's death, that you didn't love me, that you took me in out of pity. I was only 9. At that time, the world for me was divided into white and black, and I couldn't recognize a lie. I didn't know who to believe. And when Georgia lied about you killing my mother, my whole world fell apart. I mean, you replaced my father. That's when I just trusted you. I settled down and started to think of your house as my own. And that's when I found out a whole other truth. I couldn't think of anything better to do than run away. I purposely didn't respond to the police or the volunteers. I didn't want to go back. I hid in basements. I couldn't eat anything for days. To me, Uncle Kevin, you have become a terrible, lying, dangerous man. I found Maddie. When you kicked me out, I never gave up trying to find her, Betty continued. I spent hours every day going up and down the streets, asking around, and they led me to her. Betty looked lovingly at Maddie. I adopted her and raised her as my own child, never married her, and I could only trust Betty. Maddie smiled. She rarely called me Mama, laughed Betty. Usually if she wants something from me. That's what Georgia said, Kevin clarified. I wish you would have believed me. Kevin could not say anything intelligible for a while. The world around him ceased to exist because his thoughts were focused on one thing. Georgia had tricked him. She hadn't just forgotten to mention something important. She had deliberately overridden his life in a way that pleased her. He had been married to her for so many years, unaware of how dangerous she could be. Of course, he had sometimes noticed some oddities in his wife. He knew she could manipulate and get her way, but did not think that with such purposes. He was ready to tear her apart when he found out she had hidden Mady somewhere. He felt betrayed. I have a lot to think about, Kevin replied. I can't tell you both anything that would change the past. I've been such a fool, and it's hard for me to believe I lived like that. You won't mind if I want to meet you again. Victoria is my daughter over there, in the navy blue dress. Kevin pointed to the side. She was very happy to know she had a sister. She only grew up surrounded by her mother and me. Yes, I'd be glad to talk to her, Maddie replied. But it looks like we have a lot to figure out. Kevin was seething with anger, returning home. Victoria stayed for a walk until dawn. She wanted to meet the sunrise with her classmates and spend her youth traditionally. He didn't bother his daughter. He didn't want to show himself so confused, betrayed, and angry in front of her. He caught Georgia in the dining room, sitting at the snow-white bar with a glass of something alcoholic. Georgia had gotten into the habit of drinking a few years ago when she couldn't cope with the stress of her job and called her friends together. At first they drank, socialized a little, and shared their problems in a close circle. But soon Georgia didn't get enough of that. She needed more alcohol to relax, to forget and to put out of her mind, at least for a while, what she had done. For years, Georgia had lived in fear that her husband would find out about the deception. After all, he wasn't raising his own daughter. I know the truth about Mady and Betty, Kevin declared, taking her glass away from her. I met them at the restaurant where our daughter was, by the way, and they told me a funny story. I think you know what it is. Georgia was always collected and ready to fend off any attack. But when she was drunk, she lost her judgment. Kevin knew everything. There was no point in denying it. After all, she herself wanted one day to relieve her soul. "Kevin, my darling." "I'm sorry, barely speaking the words," replied Georgia. She held out her hands to him to entice forgiveness. But Kevin didn't want his wife to touch him. "You lied to me for so many years. I loved you. I didn't want to lose you. I don't believe that. People like you don't know how to love. I'm sorry." Georgia slid from the table to her knees and fell face down. "I really wanted to be with you. I knew you would love them more than me. I wanted to give you myself, and I wanted to give you myself, and I wanted to give you more. I even gave you a child. But I fooled you there too. Victoria is not your daughter, not yours." Georgia repeated twice. "What did you say?" Kevin tensed, understanding the meaning of her mumbling. He crouched down in front of his spouse to make her repeat her last words, but Georgia was passed out from the drink. There was nothing more she could say to him. Kevin sat in the living room until dawn. He knew Victoria would show up soon. He would have to have a grown-up conversation with her. He grinned wryly, realizing that for her, adulthood would begin all too quickly and painfully. Kevin felt his daughter needed to know the truth, no matter how bitter it was. In the few hours of sitting in silence, he had rethought a lot of things himself. He had been raising someone else's child for 18 years. Where did Georgia get so much cruelty? She wasn't. "Dad, what are you sitting here for?" asked a tired Victoria, evolving as she went. "Have a seat. There's a conversation to be had. Are you all right?" The daughter puzzled, looking intently at him. "Your mother and I are getting a divorce," Kevin said firmly. "It is unpleasant for you, but there is no point in hiding it." "Why not?" "What's wrong?" Victoria was frightened, looking for answers on her father's face. "Your mother cheated on me for years, and I can't forgive that. She admitted to me that I am not your father, but I still love you." Kevin took his daughter's hands and stroked them. "You will remain my little princess to me, but I can't forgive my mother." Victoria sat in silence. Life had seemed like a wonderful adventure then, and now it was splitting in half. She didn't know how to react. Rather, she didn't believe it. Got hysterical a little later when she stayed in her room. Kevin was hurting for her. She definitely had to deal with it. Victoria waited for him to wake up and sober up and give her an explanation. But her words didn't make her feel any better. "It was true. But it doesn't matter. Kevin raised you. He's your father, not the one who defended you," Georgia proved to her daughter, but she refused to listen to her. "You've made everyone miserable in one day and ruined so many people's lives." Victoria screamed cruel words at her mother. "You broke Dad, you know. You ruined my life. How can I love you now? You ruined my life. How can I love you now, knowing what you can do for yourself? You're selfish. You'll stop at nothing for your own gain. You chase an orphan out of the house to keep Daddy away." Georgia was willing to accept any punishment, but her daughter's hatred was overwhelming. Georgia begged for relief, begged to be heard, begged to be understood. But Victoria was unwilling to listen to her excuses. She left the house, telling her father that she would stay with friends for a few days. Kevin urgently prepared divorce papers and gave them to Georgia to sign. She immediately ran away from her spouse's house, unable to stand the coldness in his gaze. Kevin wasn't going to work things out with her. He decided to just cut her out of his life. Soon he got tested at the clinic and found out that he was free. Victoria certainly couldn't be his daughter, no matter how much he wanted her to be. The first dinner, to which Kevin invited Betty and Maddie to his house to introduce Victoria, went awkwardly. Victoria tried her best to break up the conversation with new people, but Kevin wasn't getting any better. "I understand you're also uncomfortable being here after all these years. I want to apologize to you. I want to let go of other people's actions and acknowledge my own. We let go a long time ago. That's what Betty said. Mary noticed that Victoria was about to cry and took her hand in hers. It will get easier. Trust me, you can forgive those who hurt you. Victoria and Maddie got along quickly. They saw no reason not to communicate and were happy to see each other on the weekends. Maddie was getting used to Kevin's house all over again, and she hoped that Betty would be there more often too. Already at her 9, she was attentive enough to understand. Uncle Kevin and Betty liked each other. Now it seemed to Maddie that there was nothing stopping them from being together. Kevin took George's betrayal hard, but at the sight of Betty, he forgot everything. He didn't want to be cautious. He wanted to get to know her for real again. Thank you for coming, Kevin smiled, pulling back a chair for Betty in the cozy cafe at lunchtime. You're not so easy to lure out of the salon. Congratulations, you've been a big success. It's nice to hear from someone as skilled as you. I only own one salon, but I'm proud of it. I like working for my soul. I make enough profit. They talked at length about work, barely touching personal topics. But gradually the awkwardness faded into the background. Kevin rejoiced every time he saw Betty again. He wanted to redeem himself for the past. He waited to see the same light in Betty's eyes that they had exchanged with each other. With each new meeting, the conversations grew freer. Betty acted casually, didn't dress appropriately for events. Kevin liked that Betty wanted to appear attractive to him. And one evening when they were sitting on the restaurant's summer veranda, he noticed that glint in her eyes. Then he dared enough to take the pen lying on the table and bring it to his lips. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't embarrassed, just smiled openly looking at him. Are you always this leisurely? Betty laughed. Always walking around. I've been walking around keeping my eyes peeled. Afraid I'd scare her off, Kevin admitted. She winked at him wickedly. They seemed to have been successfully hiding their romantic relationship for 3 months. But as soon as they appeared in front of Maddie and Victoria, they immediately started acting like high school kids caught kissing. You're going to pretend for a long time. What do you mean? We're not blind, Victoria nodded. We see you sneaking around holding hands and stuff. Kevin was embarrassed in front of his daughter. Sorry, we thought we were being discreet. So meet out in the open. I don't mind. Just said Maddie. And did you ask your daughter's blah? I'd only be happy if someone made you smile again. Victoria reached up and poked her father on the cheek. Then I'm obliged to make it official. Kevin rose from his seat and held out his hand to his lady. Dear children, we are dating and planning to get married. Kevin without hiding. Kiss Betty. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed the story, I hope for your support with a thumbs up button. Thank you and best wishes.